Oh God! How long has it been since I last heard laughter in this house? Elijah Whitmore, the billionaire single father, stood frozen at the living room door. Since the death of his wife Isabel, the famed ballet dancer, the grand mansion had known only drafts of wind and a suffocating sorrow. But tonight, from the other side of the door, music and bright laughter spilled out. Chloe and Claire, the twin daughters who had seemed to lose all joy, were spinning in circles to the steps of Amara, the new housekeeper. Elijah trembled, his heart feeling hope for the first time again. Yet that laughter, would it save them or expose the family to the world? The heavy mahogany door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling across the long gray carpeted hallway. Elijah Whitmore walked slowly, slipping off his cashmere coat damp with mist, every motion carrying the fatigue of a day full of meetings and negotiations. The house was the same as always, silent, swallowing its own master whole. But then, the unthinkable happened. From behind the door came a sound so unfamiliar it made him shiver. Music, and worse for his hardened heart, laughter. Elijah froze. In the 3 years since Isabel, his wife, his companion, the ballerina he had so admired, passed away, he had not heard such a sound within the mansion. The laughter was light and airy, like strings of bubbles bursting, seeping through the dust-laden sadness of the house. His heart raced, not from joy, but from fear. Fear that he was hallucinating, or worse, that memory itself was mocking him. His palm damp with sweat, he grasped the knob. The door swung open quietly, no creak of hinges, revealing a sight that stopped him cold. In the vast living room, where the piano sat under its thick cover, Chloe and Claire spun in circles, brown hair flying like little silk fans, their white dresses twirling with every step. Beside them, Amara, the new housekeeper, barely a week, guided their rhythm, her feet gliding lightly as if the wooden floor had been made for her. The sight was beautiful to the point of pain. Elijah suddenly realized the room he had long declared dead, buried under dust and shadow, was alive again through these three fragile figures. Music from an old speaker filled the air, crackling with static, but it carried more life than any grand orchestra ever could. He gripped the doorframe, his vision blurred. His scarred heart trembled as though it might shatter. How many times had he wished to see his daughters smile again, yet every effort had failed. He had taken them to Disneyland, hired the finest tutors, but received nothing more than hollow stares. And now, only through simple spins, through the ordinary presence of a stranger, they laughed. And he, Elijah Whitmore, a man commanding billions, stood powerless, able only to watch. In that instant, he saw Isabel, not real, but undeniable. In Chloe's sparkling eyes, in the tilt of Claire's head, in the way Amara extended her arm, echoing the grace of his late wife. Grief swelled, choking him. He had thought time would help him forget. Instead, time had only carved the emptiness deeper and wider. Then a soft thud. Claire tripped on the rug, tumbling to the floor. Elijah lunged forward, ready to rush in, but Amara was quicker, her hand steadying the girl. She did not panic. She simply smiled, urging Claire to try again. And the miracle continued. Claire giggled, rose, and spun once more. That laughter, the real kind, tore through the mourning veil that had cloaked the house for years. Elijah's legs grew heavy. Pinned to the floor, his pulse thundered. For a moment he wanted to step inside, to hold all three of them close, yet he feared breaking this fragile magic. He stepped back half a pace, drawing a deep breath, fixing the vision into memory. For the first time in years, he realized if his daughters could laugh again, perhaps he could learn to breathe once more. But Elijah had no idea that this miracle of laughter would not only spark healing for his family, but also summon a far greater trial when the world began to cast its eyes upon their secret. And before we continue with the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Dawn slipped through the tall glass windows of the Whitmore estate, light stretching into golden bands across the dust-laden hallway. Once, this had been Isabel's sanctuary. Each morning she would glide across the wooden floor in her worn ballet shoes, leaving trails of shimmering memory behind. Now the hallway was nothing but a dark tunnel, every footstep echoing with her absence. Elijah avoided it whenever he could. He buried himself in work, letting boardroom hours and numbers cover a void nothing could fill. He thought busyness might cool memory, but instead it only thickened the house's darkness. Chloe and Claire wandered like little shadows, never daring to run through that long corridor. Then Amara appeared, quiet as the first light of day. She never brought up Isabel, never forced change. But with each small action, she dropped threads of life back into the space. She pulled the curtains open, flooding the air with sunlight, making the dust rise like dancing stars. She placed a small piano in the corner, letting notes drift where once only wind had spoken. Some days, she spread colored paper on the table, coaxing the girls to paint flowers and wings, laughing when watercolor bled across their hands. Elijah watched in silence. At first, suspicion. How could such simple gestures mend a wound rooted so deep? But when Chloe tilted her head and smiled at a piano key, when Claire squealed at the sparkle of dust in the sunbeam, he had to admit, life was returning. Once or twice he even caught himself smiling, quickly turning away, afraid of being seen soft. One night, passing through the kitchen, Elijah opened an old drawer. Among the cluttered papers, he found a leather notebook, worn and frayed. Isabel's. The cover bore faint ink stains. Inside were scribbled movements, stage sketches, lines brimming with passion, and tucked in the middle, a letter. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the words were clear. To my girls. Elijah staggered as if struck by wind. His hand shook, his eyes blurred. He dropped into a chair, the notebook cover hitting the wooden table with a hollow thud. The letters swam before him, their meaning cutting deep. Isabel had left words for their daughters, for this family, as though she had known she would leave too soon. His whole body trembled. For the first time in years, Elijah couldn't hold the mask. His head fell onto the cold kitchen table, and he wept. Dry, jagged sobs, like stone layers, cracking apart inside him. After a while, soft footsteps approached. Amara stood in the doorway, no words, no questions. She simply walked forward, set a steaming cup of tea before him. Silent, but her presence wrapped around him like an unseen embrace, giving him permission to grieve without shame. Elijah looked up and met her gaze. Not pity, not curiosity, only quiet, understanding. And he realized, all this time, he had denied himself a safe moment to cry. Now, that moment had arrived, simple, but complete. Yet Elijah did not know the notebook held more than just a letter, and it would open a door leading this family toward an unexpected turning point. The Whitmore Ballet Studio had been sealed shut for years, its dust so thick even the lights seemed to suffocate. The great mirror was clouded with streaks. The chairs lined against the wall sat lifeless like witnesses to a past no one dared touch. Since Isabel's passing, the room had become forbidden ground, locked, silent, letting memories lie dormant. And yet today, a quiet sound stirred. The steady sweep of a broom, dust swirling faintly in the shafts of light. Amara, her hair tied neatly back, unlatched each tall window, letting the wind rush in to chase away the heavy air. She bent low to scrub the wooden floor, each stroke like the beginning of something new. The crisp white cloth around her wrist darkened with gray, but her lips carried a soft smile, as though whispering to herself, a room only dies when no one dances in it. That noon, Elijah passed by. He meant to hurry past, to avoid the place as always. But something stopped him, his hand frozen on the doorknob. Through the crack, he saw Amara standing in the center, her bare feet gliding, her body flowing in graceful ballet movements, blending with the sunbeams streaming from the high windows. Her arms reached outward, soft, yet strong as if conversing with the light itself. Her dark hair flew with each spin, her face tilted toward the sun, absorbed in quiet devotion. There was no stage, no audience, only her and the room. Yet each gesture was powerful enough to rouse memories turned to stone. Chloe and Claire sat cross-legged by the door, eyes wide, clapping small hands to the rhythm of the old speaker perched on the sill. Their tiny applause echoed through the room, weaving into a melody the studio had missed for years. Sometimes Claire burst into giggles when Amara spun too quickly and nearly tripped over a forgotten rag. Amara laughed too, teasing herself, then carried on as if nothing had happened. Elijah's chest stirred with a strange-tied admiration laced with ache. For a fleeting instant, the vision was Isabel herself. The tilt of the head, the arc of the arm, the way light fractured around the dance, it was as if his wife had returned. Pain rose, but unlike before, Elijah didn't turn away, didn't force himself to choke it down. His eyes blurred, tears slipping free, with nothing left to hide. He let his heart tremble, let memory flood in. And in that moment, he understood. The past was not here to torment him. It was reminding him that life still pulsed here, that something remained worth protecting. When Amara's dance ended, the twins erupted in applause, cheering as if they had witnessed a grand performance. Amara bowed, then dropped down beside them, her hair damp with sweat, her face alight with joy. She needed no stage lights. She glowed like a small flame, enough to drive shadows from the room. Elijah stepped back quietly, not wanting to be seen. But inside he knew. From this day forward, the studio would no longer be a place of darkness. It would be a beginning, the place where the family's healing would be written anew. And now, dear viewers, pause for a moment, hit subscribe before we continue deeper into the story, but only if you truly resonate with what I've shared here. Leave a comment below telling me where and what time you're watching. It's always moving to see people from all over the world joining us in this journey. The first winter winds howled outside the window, thrashing branches like twisted arms in the night. The sky was black, lightning tearing through sheets of rain, flashing the distant fogged lake. The Whitmore estate shuddered faintly each time the gust struck its glass walls. Inside, ragged breaths broke the silence of a small bedroom. Claire, one of the twin daughters, lay curled beneath her blanket, her face flushed with fever. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her lips dry and cracked, her small body trembling like a leaf tossed in a storm. Chloe sat at the edge of the bed, clutching her worn teddy bear, eyes wide with fear. Elijah burst into the room as though fleeing a nightmare. He pressed his hand to his daughter's brow, feeling the unnatural heat radiating through her tiny frame. His throat closed, gripped by a familiar dread, fear of losing yet another loved one. The phone trembled in his hand, the digits for the doctor's number blurring into a barrier he could hardly push through. Amid the chaos, Amara had already moved to the bedside. She drew a chair close, soaked a clean cloth in warm water, and wrung it with practiced care. Her hand pressed gently against Claire's forehead, her every motion steady, certain, as though she had done this 100 times before. Claire flinched, then eased, her eyelids sinking half shut. Amara kept her hand there, the other wrapped around the child's palm, as if pouring calm straight into her. Elijah dropped onto the mattress beside them, his eyes bloodshot. He was a man accustomed to commanding rooms, to negotiating billion-dollar deals, yet here he was powerless before a child's fever. He glanced at Amara and saw no panic, no hesitation, only quiet patience. In the jagged light of each thunderclap, her face seemed to glow, a small lantern against the storm. The wind shrieked through cracks, rain hammered the glass. Chloe inched closer, gently laying her teddy bear on Claire's hand before leaning against her father. Elijah wrapped an arm around her, his other hand still pressed atop the blanket, feeling Claire's shivers. Time thickened. The wall clock ticked slow, heavy beats. Outside, the world roared. Inside, only the rasp of fevered breath, a father's restless worry, and a woman's unwavering stillness remained. Then, in one white flash of lightning, Elijah looked down and realized Amara's hand rested lightly over his. Not a grip, Only a touch just enough to deliver a silent message. You're not alone. Their eyes met. No words passed. Understanding moved between them in quiet surrender. They stayed through the night, keeping vigil over Claire's restless sleep. Whenever she whimpered, Amara soothed her with a gentle pat. Elijah leaned forward to check. 3 adults and 2 small children weathered the night together in that flickering room, like a real family standing against the storm. At one point, Chloe, exhausted, dozed off against her father's shoulder, thumb still tucked between her lips. Elijah tucked the blanket closer, then turned back to Amara. She gave a faint smile, tilting her head as if to say, "She'll be fine." It was not just reassurance for him. It was a reminder to the long-slumbering house itself. Storms always pass. The hours crept by. Outside, the rain still pounded, the wind still screamed, but inside, a fragile calm began to take root. By dawn, Claire's breathing grew steady, her fever easing. She rolled onto her side, her small hand clinging to Amara's as though afraid to let go. Elijah finally exhaled, his shoulders trembling as fear melted into weary relief. He looked at Amara, her back straight, her eyes rimmed with fatigue but resolute. No words of thanks were needed. In that moment, he understood. Some commitments never need to be spoken, yet endure a lifetime. That storm-lit night became a turning point. Amid the howling wind in the long corridors, an unspoken vow was forged. No one in this house would ever be left alone again. But Elijah could not yet see that this silent vow would soon be tested, when the outside world came pressing in to challenge the fragile bond they had built. The morning after the storm, the first light spilled into the room, carrying with it the damp scent of rain. The house still held the trace of fever medicine in the air, but it felt brighter, warmer, like the mansion had shed a layer of darkness overnight. Claire slept peacefully now, her breathing even, her fevered face eased into calm. Elijah sat in the chair, eyes hollowed from a sleepless night, yet the faint curve at his lips betrayed something he thought long lost: relief. Small footsteps padded down the hall. Chloe, clutching her stack of colored papers, entered with unusual eagerness. She tugged at her father's sleeve and held up a drawing she had just finished. Elijah stiffened when he saw it. Their family himself, the twins, even Isabel together on a stage. Behind them stretched a pair of great white wings, sheltering them all. Chloe whispered, voice low as if afraid to wake her sister. "Mom said we can still fly even if she's not here." The words pierced straight through Elijah's armor. He sat frozen, his hand trembling as he traced the crude, vibrant strokes. In those clumsy colors, Isabel appeared again, not to reopen wounds, but to kindle something new. The idea of a ballet tribute to Isabel began there. Amara was the first to give it voice. She placed the drawing in a small wooden frame and hung it in the recently revived studio, a silent promise. Then, she began teaching the girls the simplest steps: tiny tiptoes, soft bows, arms curved like wings. Gradually, laughter replaced the suffocating silence that had long haunted the room. Elijah watched for the first time. He chose a shadowed corner, the light falling across half his face. At first, his chest tightened. Every movement of Amara echoed Isabel, the tilt of her head, the way her feet lifted as if to touch the sky. But little by little, pain gave way to calm. He realized those small footsteps on the wooden floor were no longer shadows of what he had lost. They were a new language, a language of hope. Chloe was often clumsy, spinning too fast and toppling into her sister. Claire burst out laughing, helping her up. Sometimes both collapsed in a heap, sending Amara into laughter too, and Elijah found himself shaking his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Awkward, unpracticed, yet more real than any polite grin he had ever given in boardrooms. Day by day, the studio became the heart of the house. Afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, dancing with the girls. The sound of tiny shoes tapping echoed across the estate, breaking the silence that had become habit. Elijah, instead of avoiding it, began stopping by whenever he could. He carried his laptop but rarely opened it. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on the twirls and leaps, afraid to miss a single second. One day, Chloe stopped, panting, hair plastered with sweat, her eyes sparkling as she looked up at him. "Do I look like Mom?" Elijah choked back the answer. He only placed a hand gently on her head, but in his gaze, the answer was already clear. Slowly, what began as a child's dream on paper began to shape into something greater. With patience and care, Amara wove the girls' scattered steps into a seamless sequence, crafting a story. The ballet in Isabel's memory was no longer just play, it became a shared project, one the whole family carried together. Late at night, Elijah began reworking Isabel's old notes in her worn notebook, piecing them into a rehearsal script. He knew this was not only about preserving her memory, but showing his daughters that their mother had never truly disappeared. And now, dear viewers, if this story has touched you, drop a 1 in the comments or say, "I'm still here." Stay with us to continue the journey. The days of rehearsal passed, and the Whitmore mansion seemed to shed its old skin. The studio was no longer a dust-laden relic, but had become the beating heart of the house. Children's laughter, the strains of ballet music, and the tap of tiny feet echoed like the healthy rhythm of a heart waking after years of slumber. But that very revival drew eyes from outside. One weekend morning, Elijah received a thick envelope stamped with the embossed logo of a major media conglomerate. Inside was an offer. They wanted exclusive rights to film Isabel's memorial performance, to broadcast it as a special television feature on Rising from Loss. The bold letters read like praise, but to Elijah they cut like knives. He clenched the paper, jaw tight. To him, this performance wasn't for tickets or cameras feeding on grief. It was where Isabel would be remembered, where his daughters would find their wings again. The thought of it turned into entertainment made him feel violated. Rage surged. He wanted to shut it all down, lock the studio, protect his family from prying eyes. Only Amara kept him still. She placed her hand over the envelope, her voice steady, warm, resolute. "They can twist it into scandal, or you can turn it into a message, a public testament to strength after loss." Elijah said nothing. He knew she was right. Yet inside him, fear loomed larger than hope. Fear his daughters might be hurt again. Fear Isabel's memory might be distorted by others. The day of the dress rehearsal arrived faster than he expected. The small academy hall filled with light. Rows of seats occupied old friends of Isabel, a handful of carefully invited journalists, and strangers whose faces Elijah weighed with suspicion. Chloe and Claire, dressed in white, eyes bright with nerves and anticipation. Amara adjusted their ribbons, smiling softly to calm them. The music began. The girls took their first steps. Their tiny feet struck the floor, each tap echoing like a heartbeat. Elijah sat in the front row, hands locked on his knees, gaze fixed to the stage. In every motion he glimpsed Isabel, her presence flickered in soft arms, in bright eyes spinning in the light. But at the height of the dance, Chloe twirled too fast. Her foot caught, her body pitched forward. The music carried on, but the hall fell silent. Elijah's chest seized, terror crashing over him, and he shot to his feet. On stage, Amara knelt beside Chloe instantly. No panic, no scolding, only a tender smile. She leaned close, her voice calm but carrying across the tense silence. "When you fall, you stand and keep dancing." Chloe blinked, tears shimmering. She wiped them quickly with the back of her hand, drew a breath, and rose. The hall remained hushed, holding its breath. Claire took her sister's hand. Together they spun again, firmer, braver. Applause trickled, then swelled into thunder. Elijah, overcome, strode onto the stage. He reached for their hands, then joined their circle. White skirts flared, laughter burst free, and the hall roared in rhythm. Tears streamed down his face, not of sorrow, but of pride. He understood at last. Grief no longer had to be hidden. It could be strength not just for him, not just for his daughters, but for anyone searching for a reason to rise after loss. The hall erupted with applause, cameras flashing. But for the first time, Elijah felt no fear. He knew Isabel, somewhere, was smiling. Yet he could not foresee that this public moment would bring more than light. It would open a new door, drawing the Whitmore family into the unforgiving gaze of the outside world. Could they keep their fragile flame of hope burning against the storms to come? The grand theater blazed with light on a winter night. Every seat filled, the air charged with both anticipation and reverence. The heavy red velvet curtain trembled as the overture began. Behind the wings, Chloe and Claire trembled inside their mother's worn satin ballet shoes. The silver ribbons were frayed, but Amara tied them carefully, her hands steady as if fastening faith itself. Elijah stood close by, not in his usual business suit, but in a simple dark shirt. He looked both misplaced and unshakable, the quiet sentinel of this private world. The music swelled. The lights rose. The twins stepped forward, hesitant at first, then flowing into the melody. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Their turns, their awkward but heartfelt movements slowly claimed the space. Amara watched from the wings, pride glowing in her eyes. Elijah sat in the front row, his hand gripping his knee, his heartbeat echoing every step of his children. At the crescendo, the old satin shoes struck the floor, a sharp note ringing like a greeting from the past. Chloe spun, Claire raised her arm, and for an instant, Isabel's presence shimmered. Not real, but vivid enough to clutch every heart in the room. Tears streaked across faces in the audience. As the music softened, Chloe and Claire clasped hands, their eyes shining. Elijah rose. Without script, without plan, he walked onto the stage. The lights fell on him, catching the tears glittering on his face. In his hand was the other pair of shoes, Isabel's, kept in a wooden box. He knelt and placed them into his daughter's hands. He didn't give a speech, didn't unravel stories. He simply said, voice low, but carrying through the hall, "You saved all of us." The theater erupted. Applause and sobs thundered together, a cleansing storm. That night, no one thought of scandal. No one whispered of rumors. They saw only a family rising from grief, turning loss into a dance of hope. By morning, headlines across the city blazed with images of the stage. But the words no longer read, "Billionaire family bears tragedy," but instead, tiny wings lifted an entire theater. For the first time in years, Elijah opened the paper without fear. He folded it shut, his gaze softened, as though Isabel were smiling at him from just over his shoulder. From that day, the Whitmore home changed. The once cold dining room rang with clinking spoons and bursts of laughter between children's stories. The back garden, long abandoned, now sprouted fresh seeds. Chloe and Claire raced across the soil, hands muddy, faces radiant, bursting into giggles whenever Elijah fumbled with a watering can, splashing his shoes. In the quiet glow of late afternoons, Amara and Elijah often sat side by side on the wooden bench, watching the twins chase the sunset. One such evening, Elijah placed his hand over hers, not rushed, not promising grand things. And one day, amid the peace, a gentle kiss came not to replace, but to continue. Isabel remained always, in each step, each spin, each beat of sweat and burst of laughter. But her memory was no longer a weight. It had become a bridge, lifting them forward. The stage lights dimmed, yet the echo of that night still lingered in every heart present. The Whitmore family had stepped into the light, reshaping pain into a ballet of rebirth. Elijah, Chloe, Claire, and Amara reclaimed their own faith and left the audience with one simple truth. Every wound can become a pair of wings if we dare to face it and hold one another up. But the story does not end here. Once the stage door has been opened, the whole world begins to watch. Attention, praise, and scrutinizing eyes are closing in. Will the Whitmore family hold on to the fragile peace they've just found? Will the tender love budding between Elijah and Amara blossom, or will it be tested by public judgment and secrets yet to surface? And above all, are the wings Isabel left behind in memory strong enough to shelter them through the storms ahead? The lesson of this story speaks to all of us. Sometimes, healing does not come from hiding our pain, but from the courage to step out and share it. The Whitmore family has shown that only when we allow ourselves to fall and rise again do we find true strength. If you're watching this video anywhere across America, whether in Boston, New York, Dallas, or a small town in the Midwest, remember this: you are not alone. Someone out there is also fighting their own darkness, and sometimes a single word you share can become their light. So if this story touched your heart, share this video with your family and friends. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and share your thoughts. Do you want the journey of Elijah, Chloe, Claire, and Amara to continue in part 2? What do you hope will unfold when the stage lights fade and new trials arrive? The story is not closed, and perhaps you will be part of the next chapter where wings never stop beating.